It's time to discuss the latest Florida State football recruiting news.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Brian Smith with Locked On Seminoles. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. I'm happy you're here, and we're about to talk some Florida State football recruiting news. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Let's jump into it. A couple of notes. Florida State had a pretty good-sized weekend, and they had players from different parts of the country. Some of the information, it wasn't surprising, but some is. Just to give you an overview of how crazy recruiting is around the country right now, Alabama got a kid committed from Pennsylvania, while a kid from their own state went to Miami. There's kids that, like Penn State got a kid. They lost a kid from their own state. He goes to Alabama, but they got a cornerback from Mater Dei in Los Angeles. Anything is possible right now in recruiting. Anything. And just to kind of feed off of that, everything I've heard is that, as an example, once again, Zion Grady, one of the top prospects in the state of Alabama, has a real considerable shot to end up at Florida State. He's a one-time Alabama commitment. Auburn really wants him. He has several other offers around the country. He's got Ohio State visit coming up, etc. But he had a great visit to Florida State. That's one kid I just kind of want to highlight. I've seen him. I've met the kid. Really good guy. This is the kind of guy that Florida State has missed on for a long time. Edge rushers, guys that can play outside linebacker or put their hand down in the dirt and get after it. Florida State hasn't recruited that many of those players directly out of high school in the last 3-4 years that were truly upper echelon. So I wanted to bring him up. I really don't think there are enough guys like him in general, but Florida State, Auburn, Tennessee, Miami, Ohio State, Alabama was trying to get in there and get a visit, but they screwed up his recruitment. When you have that happen, if you're Florida State, you've got to bounce right onto that opportunity, and they did. Florida State's done a good job of selling what they have. They're not trying to be anything outside of who they are with the recruitments, by the way. That's one of the reasons their culture is good. They're not selling a bill of goods to players, and it's going to work. I think that Florida State's going to win some recruitments like this that I didn't even think. I'm just going to go down the list here. It's going to be, again, a pretty wide range, and there are just a ton of players. So just bear with me. Greg Thomas, we call him Zay sometimes, cornerback, American Heritage High School in South Florida. This is a kid that's going to make his announcement later this month. I will be absolutely, unequivocally shocked if Florida State does not land him. I put up a clip on Locked On Seminoles X showing him in coverage from this past weekend's OT7. He is one of the longest corners in the country. They're doing a good job of getting DBs in general, obviously, at Florida State. It's the one spot I am really not worried about because they're recruiting it so well. But adding him, he could play free, he could play nickel, he could play all kinds of spots because he's so physical, so long, and he runs pretty darn well. Finally getting his just due. Clemson would be the only team, from talking to Zay, that really has a shot to kind of pull the upset. But I think Florida State's too far in advance. I look for them to get his commitment later this month, 26, 27, somewhere around there. Expect Florida State to get his commitment, barring him changing something. Just before I forget, speaking of OT7, a quick story on Tramell Jones Jr. He was playing with SFE, Jamie French, and all those guys. Very talented. He did not start well the day that I saw him in the event on Friday. Had a poor performance early on, but he didn't allow it to bother him. Threw a pick or whatever. The next game, he came out and played very well. This is a sign of maturation. You're human. You're going to have bad games. But Florida State, again, this is part of their culture. They recruit kids that are a little more mature in some ways, is what I'm seeing. They make big box decisions, not just with recruiting decisions, but how they train, how they prepare from game to game, and even play to play. At OT7 finals, for those of you who don't know, that's as good a 7-on tournament as there is. It's on NFL Network, etc. That is an elite opportunity to go against top competition. You're going to see the ball go the other way sometimes. Every team has a Power 5 corner, and I do mean every. So you're looking at an opportunity on every play to YouTube somebody or vice versa. Again, Tramell didn't allow that to bother him. He played better as the day went on and then throughout the weekend. So I still think he's going to end up at Florida State, although there's been whispers about other schools. I think he's going to go play for the Noles. One of the more interesting recruitments, and I didn't bother him with interviews because I know it's going to play out longer, is Dallas Wilson. He's the big-time receiver out of Tampa Bay Tech, Florida State, and several other schools continue to recruit him. I don't know if he'll end up visiting Florida State this summer. I don't think so. Right now, it looks like it's going to be in the season, and I think that's smart. I've said it for a long time, talking to people around other podcast networks, other programs. I think this is a long-term recruitment. He's technically an Oregon commit, has been for a year or more, but that's hard to get a kid from Tampa to go to Oregon. With that being stated, Florida State, Miami, Florida, and the rest of the free world has still attempted to get Dallas to visit their school, etc. Don't be surprised if Florida State is a school in the final grouping at the very end in December. They'll probably bring him in for an official visit later, but he looked great at the event. I didn't even bother him because I know this is going to take a long time. That's a great player. You have to recruit him. 6'3", 200-pound receivers that can run by guys do not grow on trees. Just keep his name on the back of your mind. It's Dallas Wilson. Speaking of a guy that Florida State has a chance with and should get, but it's not a lock. And the other side of it is Solomon Thomas. I've mentioned him numerous times on this show. I haven't heard anything vastly different. The school that I'm most concerned about if he doesn't sign with Florida State is Florida. They have really turned up the heat. Just keep that in mind. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. You're not going to keep all your commitments, but you cannot lose 5-star in-state players to your arch rival. That would be a blow that would be really hard to take. I don't know what his timeline is to make a final decision. Solomon's a kid that wants to play it out and see everything, and good for him. But at the same time, I don't know what his timeline is. So that's just a recruitment. Florida State's going to have to wait for the facts to come through or however they do it. That's a kid you have to get. He's been committed for quite a while. Florida State did a great job recruiting him, but Florida's doing a pretty good job too. Zaire Addison, speaking of Oregon from a moment ago in Tampa area, he committed to Oregon on his visit. I texted with him today. He said he's not going to take any more visits. There's a Tampa kid that's going to Oregon again. It's pretty bizarre. I don't know if that's going to stick, but he said he's not going to take any more visits. At one point, I thought he was going to go to Florida State. Now he's not even going to take the OV. That just shows you how wild recruiting has been, not only this week, but really throughout this year. Part of it's NIL, part of it's kids just want to travel and go to different places, but you just don't see the same kind of recruiting outcomes that you used to. I don't know what that is, and if Florida State can do anything about it, but kids leave the state they're in, Florida or otherwise, a heck of a lot more than they used to. Zaire's got 40-plus offers, Georgia, Alabama, Florida State, Miami, you name it. But he's going to go play for the Ducks. He's one of the top offensive tackles in the country. A kid that I'm really curious about, and I spoke to him at OT7, is Wadarian Clarity. He plays at Escambia. That's where Emmitt Smith and a whole bunch of other great players have come out of over the years in Pensacola. He is an elite academic kid. He just visited Stanford. He's going to go visit Washington. Florida State was a visit this weekend after he went to OT7. I have no idea where he's going to go because his recruitment's starting to pick up, but he's a safety that's very talented, mature young man. I don't know how many safeties FSU wants to take, and they're in on a bunch. I just want to mention him, and I'm still trying to dig into a little more news on some of the other DBs. But that's a great kid, and if he ended up at Florida State, I think he would represent the Noles well. He can certainly play. He can run and hit, and he can play free or strong safety. I don't think it would matter. But they're in on some other guys too, Bryce Fitzgerald and some other players too. I don't know who the number one guy is on the board, if they're just dead set on getting somebody no matter how long it takes. The timelines of these kids, if you've got several guys at one spot, is very important. And safety's kind of turning out that way for Florida State. So we'll see. Speaking of Fitzgerald, at one time I thought he was definitely going to go to Miami. But now I don't even think Miami's in his top three based on a list that came out, Florida State, and LSU. Miami Columbus kid, not having Miami in his top final group is shocking. That's the same school that Cristobal went to. Same with Alex Mirabal, his best buddy, the offensive line coach. That's kind of unusual, but Florida State's got a shot. He was just on his visit. Great player, great kid, very versatile. Miami Columbus is one of the best programs in the Deep South, the state of Florida, obviously. I think that's a kid that you would do better to have than not. I think he's a playmaker, and he's pretty underrated too. Got a lot of range, 6'2" kid, can really run. I think it would do really good things for Florida State if he came to Tallahassee. Let's talk a little bit more about some kids that I didn't know as much about but learned some at OT7, as well as learned a little bit about some of these kids in general here next on Locked On Seminoles. Again, this has been a wild weekend, so we're going to talk more about it up next here on Locked On Seminoles. If you're trying to find an opportunity to find good people for your small business, LinkedIn Jobs is the place for you. It has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, it might not have the time or resources to hire exactly in the manner they would like. That's where LinkedIn comes in. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier for you, no matter what type of small business you have. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process a little bit easier and a little bit quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. That's a lot of companies. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's talk a little bit more about some of the prospects here. But I also just want to mention, with as much as we're changing, kids all over the place with these visits or where they're committing, it's inevitable. Sometime in the next month or so, you're going to hear a few new names, myself included. Just want to throw that out there. And to that point, this is a kid that I find interesting. I was speaking with the father of a recruit. He's a big-time player, class of 26, so he's only going to be a junior. And he said, the kid at our school that not enough people are knowing about is London Simmons. I'm like, okay, tell me about him. And it just so happens Florida State is involved. They recently offered, he's a 6'3", 295-pound defensive tackle. He's out of the Jackson, Mississippi area, plays at Hartfield Academy. It's a great program. And I watched his film and I'm like, why aren't more people after him? Then I did some digging. It's a little more than I thought, but he just doesn't get much attention. Mississippi kids typically don't. As far as his visits go, he already went to NC State. They do a great job recruiting D linemen that are under the radar. Bama's June 14th. Arkansas is June 21st. Florida State will likely be in the fall. Now, this is a kid that when I watched his film, it didn't matter if he lined up at D end, again, at over 290, that he overwhelmed guys with quickness and power. And he can change directions and move. Like, this is the kind of kid you always see at Georgia and Bama and Clemson. Always. And I'm like, how is he not ranked higher? He's like a low 3-star kid. But I keep forgetting my own rule. Mississippi kids, you can't really buy the ranking because nobody scouts that state. And that's why there's so many good players that come out of there. And per capita, the state of Mississippi produces some of the highest NFL draft rates of any state in America. Here's a great example of it. This Simmons kid can play. Florida State or any other institution would be fortunate to get him. I think Florida State is on that cusp of getting to where they want to be, recruiting elite players out of the high school ranks. I do not care what his ranking is. Could care less. It's false. The film does not lie. If they bring this kid in the fall for an official visit, they would be doing themselves a favor. Can't teach the size, can't teach the quickness and the overall athleticism, and he's pretty tenacious too. Simmons is the kind of guy that Florida State used to get all the time under Bowden. They had dominant defensive lines, and it started right in the middle, as close as possible to the football being snapped. Defensive tackle and nose guard. Simmons could play either one in a 4-3 or 3-4. He could be a zero tech. There aren't many zero techs that could move. Again, how he's ranked a 3-star is hilarious. But that's why you see Alabama's got a visit set up with it. That's why Florida State just offered him, is trying to get him on a visit, etc. Really good football player. I think Florida State would do very, very well. I'm curious if there aren't a few more guys like this, maybe D-line or other spots, that end up shaking out because Florida State staff does not care about recruiting rankings, and they seem to find guys all the time that are under the radar end up being good players. Another kid that, speaking of under the radar, and it kind of surprised me, got a commitment. Georgia was the team to beat for Todd Robinson. He's a kid out of Valdosta, Georgia. Everybody else was recruiting him as a running back. Georgia wants him as a kind of a hybrid defensive player in the secondary. He committed to the Dogs. I'm curious to see if he still visits Florida State or anybody else. Georgia allegedly is even talking to him about playing a little offense. I still don't buy that because Kirby doesn't really, he wants a guy just to do one thing. They get enough players at Georgia. But Florida State, they need to get a good running back in this class. Maybe it ends up being Osmond Croma, but maybe not. That's a player. If they don't get him, this Robinson kid's really good. I know Valdosta is a great program, been around it before. That's an interesting program too, because Florida State needs to get back into that area in South Georgia. It would certainly benefit them. The two linebackers that are talked most about with Florida State get mixed results here on what I've heard. Take it for what it's worth. Tavion Wallace is a kid Florida State has trended with. Georgia's making a run at him. It's an in-state kid for them, another one of the big county schools. Florida State needs to win some of these battles. They won some of them last year. They got Cam, etc. But they just lost Zayden Walker. They would have taken him in a heartbeat. He just committed to Georgia, arguably the best linebacker in the country. They just got Elias Williams to drop everybody else. Florida State and a bunch of other schools would have happily taken him as well. They're going to have to win some of these just straight up head-to-head. Georgia's going all out for in-state kids if Florida State's going to get back to the top. Right now, Georgia's winning more of those. Tavion Wallace is one of those that got a chance to win. The other linebacker is an in-state kid. He's from South Florida, Waxahachie, down near West Palm. Ty Jackson. I have heard all kinds of things on his kid. I have no idea where he's going to go, but Florida State is in the mix. He is an absolute speedster at the linebacker spot, can lay the wood. I don't know when his timeline is or whatever. He doesn't really talk to many people. I've heard different things about it, but Florida State's in the mix. Again, this is the kind of kid Florida State always seemed to win the recruitment at the very end under Bowden. If you're going to get to the elite level, you got to get these kids, especially in state. I'll be curious to see where he goes. Again, his name is Ty Jackson. He's really, really good. The best news, arguably, from the weekend, I spoke at length with Vernell Brown. I really like where Florida State stands with him. I will be surprised at this point if he does not sign with Florida State. And the decision could come this summer, although Vernell said, no, it's not a lock. We'll see. But Florida State has done a tremendous job of recruiting him. And Vernell has made it clear that if everything was even, he would prefer to stay in state. Right now, Florida State's doing the best job with him. And I just think that it's going to be sooner than later. I think he will pull the trigger before the summer. That's my gut, but he did not tell me that directly. It's just that our overall conversation led me to believe Florida State's the team to beat there. I'll go on that sword right now. I'm not the only one that thinks that as well. Continuing on, they've got a really big visit this weekend. I mentioned a moment ago that Florida State has to find a way to beat straight up, no ifs, no ands or buts about it, beat Georgia for some of these elite players, especially defensive guys. The state of Georgia, for whatever reason, is the best in the country just producing a wide range of really top-notch defensive players. I don't know what it is. Justice Terry might be the best player in the country. It's from Manchester, Georgia. It's hilarious because it's a 1A high school, not that far from the Alabama border. He's technically committed to Southern Cal. They just threw a bunch of NIL money at him. But he's going to visit Florida State this upcoming weekend, barring something changing. This is your chance. I have no idea what Florida State's NIL stance is, but if they're going to get in that race, it's going to be a bundle of money for this kid. If you're going to compete with Georgia, Ohio State, etc., you have to find a way to get the elite D tackles. There is no shortcut. The transfer portal is not, I repeat, is not the best way to go about this. Out of high school. How do I know? Because that's what Georgia, LSU, Bama, etc. do every year. At some point, you got to develop them out of high school, and that means getting the elite kids, no matter how hard it is. This is the most important recruit from the rest of the summer, in my opinion, on Florida State's board. He will be in Tallahassee this next weekend. Justice Terry. I've talked about him before here. This is their chance. I have no idea how serious he's taking Florida State, but he's taking an OB. That's enough. If you get him on campus, you have a shot. The last thing I want to talk about as far as Florida State goes is kind of like the overall feel and how everything's going. And I've got one player to talk about with that, again, just to kind of show how crazy recruiting is. That's up next here on Locked On Seminoles. All right. Today's sponsor is also FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet on all of it here at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200. You can bet on anything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a big win for your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Earlier this year, one of the players that I thought Florida State had a great in with was Hilton Drake Stubbs. We call him Drake. He's out of Mandarin. It's the same high school. There's several other players that Florida State's recruited over the years. It's also the same high school as Tramel Jones, same high school as Jamie French, etc. And I asked him, I said, you're committed to SC. Anybody else you're going to visit? And I thought Florida State would be the first words out of his mouth. I was wrong. Even though his brother is a walk-on with Florida State's football program, even though he's visited several times and Florida State ardently recruited him, he's not going to even visit Florida State. That surprised me. He's going to visit Florida, Miami, and he said those are going to be the last 2 official visits that he's going to be done. I don't know why. I didn't get into it with him when I had a few moments, but I found that odd. And then I kept getting all that information like I heard and I kind of brought up in the first few minutes of this show today. And now I'm just to the point I'm kind of numb to it. It is as random as it gets when a kid that has a direct tie to a school that he lives 2 hours from decides, you know what, I'm not even going to take an OV there. Recruiting is truly to the point, truly, that anything is possible. Stubbs is a good fit for about any school because he's just a good guy. Florida State included would do well to sign him. But this is just a point, again, you can't trust what you see early on in the process, what they say. You go by what they do. I mentioned that a lot. Who do you take visits to? It's bottom line. Florida State, to my knowledge, did everything, and I don't think they backed off of him. I could be wrong, but I don't know why you would back off Stubbs. And it doesn't look like he's even going to take his OV to Florida State. So there's going to be some other new names and some other things coming up. I'll talk about it later this week here on Locked On Seminoles. But right now, Florida State's had a ton of kids in, and that's some of the guys that I got information on. There'll be more info as the week goes on. But the big recruiting weekend for Florida State is not until June 21st. This coming weekend, not very much, I don't believe. I forget the number, but I'll preview them as the week goes on right here on Locked On Seminoles. And again, thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate it. Please hit that like button and that notification bell. Do me a solid and share this podcast. I'd truly appreciate that. This has been Locked On Seminoles.